You see everyone start to adjust and sit ready. We must be very, very close to the start. We want to have those blades fully under the water to make the most out of that very first stroke. And yes, they were away. Nice clean start from both crews, trying to get out as far as possible away from each other.
Both crews looking clean and feisty off the start here. They'll be trying to wind the rate up as fast as possible, hitting over 40 strokes per minute off the start. And they'll be keeping the strokes pretty short with not much bodies until they lengthen out and settle onto a sustainable rhythm. So it looks like Sydney have just jumped them slightly off the start, making a slight gain on the Melbourne crew.
Well, we'll shortly start to see the advantage of Melbourne's first corner play a role, and that might bring these crews closer together.
And just as you said that, it looks like Melbourne's coming back here through Sydney. Let's hope that Phoebe steers a good racing line, going nice and tight around that corner.
Yeah, you can see some pretty drastic movements in the steering there. Melbourne University boat took a hard left around this bend. You can see the red buoy in the water that Sydney University has to go around, which has evened out the crews on the river. Sydney University going very wide there. You may be able to see there are some poles in the water that have caused damages in the past for people training on the river, and you can see
with
that
Sydney, you can see the 7 seat has either stopped rowing for some reason. Maybe there was a crab in the boat.
I believe that may have been a call from the coxswain to help them around that bend, to drop out one rower on that side to avoid the rocks and other things that lie along that north bank.
Drastic big bend there for Sydney, so the cox mentioned that she didn't want to have to stick her upper half of her body into the water to get the crew around the corner, so she'll have just called the 7 seat to stop rowing to help that instead.
But what it means though, Melbourne University has a fair bit of a lead. It looks to be about half a boat length, and so that may be telling down the track. You can see just how narrow the river here is at this point, between the pontoon on one side and the rocks on the other.
Blades almost overlapping here.
So we may have a collision. It
Maybe
looks like
a
it's
blade
very
clash.
close.
This is going to be crucial here. We can see whether both crews can keep hold of their blade and not let it get sucked under the water in a crab, because we've got definite overlap here.
So this is actually quite a dangerous spot for Melbourne University to be in. If there is a collision, the collision happens further up the boat for Melbourne University rather than Sydney University. It can cause more of a disruption to the rhythm of the boat when that happens.
Looks like the crews are pulling further apart here, avoiding the blade clash.
They're still very close together, and they're also very close together. You see the bow sections coming basically level. It looks to be that Sydney University is just taking the lead now. Their boat is surging in front with every stroke.
Yeah, they're looking very powerful, the Sydney girls there.
They have the benefit of this first corner as well to them, so they may be able to pull slightly ahead.
Still very close here. Melbourne trying to hold on around this bend. If they don't let Sydney get away around this bend, then they'll be hopefully in a good position to put a push after the bend and try and get back up on them.
So Sydney University's taken a couple of seats there in the last 30 seconds or so. Looks like they're powering ahead. Still very close together in terms of their blades. It looks like there's only centimetres in between them, and I wouldn't be surprised if there is a clash.
Miller Marston in the bow seat there of Melbourne Uni. She'll be trying desperately not to catch crab there. There's significant overlap with the 7 seat of Sydney. Here they're coming under the bridge.
You can see just from that shot that the blades are overlapping at points. It's quite surprising actually that there hasn't been much contact. It's very important when you're in this situation as a rower to keep pushing those hands down at the finish of the stroke to get the blades high off the water. You want to try and be on top of your opponent's blades in this situation.
So Sydney here, they haven't managed to get clear water just yet, but looks like they're trying to edge away. Melbourne doing all that they've got to stay holding on, not letting Sydney get clear water. The Cox Phoebe will be calling them to keep that rate nice and high. They're not going to let them settle too low into a relaxed rhythm while they're still behind. Both crews looking pretty clean here. Blades catching in good time. Overhead shot here going into this next bridge. You can see Melbourne are just falling slightly behind and Sydney are getting clear water. They'll be calling a big push here off the bridge. They'll get their heels down off the footplate, power in the legs.
And so again, Sydney University looking to make the most of this corner in their favour, stretching out that lead. It definitely is clear water now, probably about a boat length and a half. And this corner may add to that slightly. You see the relative lines of both crews, Melbourne University coming slightly off to the left, Sydney University hugging that corner really closely.
Looks like we might have a repeat of the men's race here with the Sydney University in the lead, Melbourne trying to catch up. You can see Georgia trying hard in stroke seat, gritting her teeth, trying to keep that rate high. The water's looking nice and clean here, isn't it?
Yes, perfect conditions that we have. It doesn't look like it is quite as windy in along this stretch as further up closer to the start. That is the nature of this river, where there are patches that are windy. You can even see it in this shot. You see those silvery patches on the water, a little bit more wind in some parts rather than others.
Sydney University will definitely be more used to rowing in rough conditions out on the harbour in Sydney, much more exposed. So this clean water with not much wind will hopefully be in Melbourne's favour on their home ground. The girls here gritting in deep. They've got big pressure coming from their legs. Their bodies rocking together, drawing through strong at the finish.
As we go to this aerial shot, we might be able to see sort of the relative distance per stroke that each boat is taking. Often in 8th rowing, you look to try and get the blades of the stroke seat and 7th seat, the ones closest to the bottom of the picture, past the puddles of the bow seat and the 2 seat of the stroke before. You see Sydney University getting just slightly more length out of every stroke than Melbourne University.
That's true. Melbourne are probably rating higher and they'll have shorter strokes here as they're trying to catch up with Sydney, but they've got less distance per stroke, so less run of the boat at the finish. So that'll be a bit less efficient than what Sydney's rowing at the moment, and they'll be feeling the burn.
So we're just going on the Punt Road Bridge there, coming into a bend in Melbourne University's favour, and then into Morell Bridge. You see Sydney University coming across into that centre line.
Great close shots here of the rowers. You can really see their determination in their face. 4.1 kilometres, rating at this rate is going to be an absolute killer, but they're doing well to stay together.
Yes, we're well and truly into the second half of this race now. That's when the legs start to hurt the most, as you start to wind up before the finish, sort of another kilometre or two before things really ratchet up. Sydney University looking very comfortable and confident out in front, trying to make the most out of every stroke. You see those blades just about clearing the puddles of the previous stroke.
Yeah, so Sydney, they've got a comfortable lead now. They'll be able to just relax a bit more, get into that rhythm, maybe drop the rate slightly and just get the length per stroke, which will help save their legs for the finish and wind for the line if Melbourne do manage to make a comeback.
So both crews under Morell Bridge there. You see some cyclists and some spectators on the top of the bridge watching the boats go underneath.
About a boat length and a half of clear water there between Sydney and Melbourne.
So this next corner turns around to the right, again Sydney University's favour, although both boats are looking to be rowing basically the same line at this point in time. You do have to be a little bit careful because that inside corner of this bend can be notoriously slow moving water, also some reeds that you don't want to get snagged on. So both crews staying fairly central for good reason.
Yeah, so it's balancing off the fast water in the centre and being close to the bank for shorter distance to travel. Both crews really having to dig in deep now.
Looks like the margin has basically been fairly stable for the last sort of kilometre or so. Sydney University not pulling out too far in front from where they were earlier in the race.
Whether that's them just playing it safe and being comfortable and just keeping the strokes efficient to save something for the finish line, or whether that's that they're trying to break free of Melbourne and they can't quite achieve that yet. Catch timing looking really good here.
Yeah, it's very important in any rowing race, but in particular in the longer ones, that the crew is moving as close in time as possible. You want those blades going into the water and out of the water at precisely the same moment, so it doesn't disrupt the boat. You get the most amount of run efficiency out of every ounce of energy that you're expending.
With these aerial shots from the helicopter here, we're very lucky today. We can see just how aesthetic rowing is as a sport, with all the angles of the blades and the bodies of the rowers being perfectly in time. This is what these girls train for about twice a day, the elite athletes.
And also a lovely shot of the city skyline there. A very lovely place to row and train for these crews, or Melbourne University in particular, as they train here all the time. A great location.
Yes, these athletes are very impressive, being able to train about twice a day whilst balancing their studies at university.
Yeah, many athletes tend to reduce their university load somewhat, so they can both train more every day and also to race in this event as many times as possible. So you see Sydney University in the distance going underneath the Swan Street Bridge. And the centre line.
2 lengths of clear water there between the crews at least. Looks like Sydney have made some slight gains there in the last stretch of the race. Can Melbourne wind it up and keep their hands into the fire for the finish line?
So coming into the final straight section of this course, about 500 metres long or so, you see on the left-hand bank up there, this judge's box. That is the finish tower for any 2-kilometre racing that occurs on this river. And that marks the start of the bend around to the left and into the finish line past MEBC.
It'll probably mark the start where the coxers really call their crews to be winding up for the finish line, increasing the rate, more strokes per minute. You can see their biceps glistening there in the sun. These are very strong girls.
So Sydney University coming across to that south bank again, just to make the most of the corner. They have the liberty to do so because they are so far in front. They can take the run of the river as they see fit. Just passing judge's box there, coming into probably the last 300 or 400 metres of this race.
With each stroke, they'll be pushing their puddles into the Melbourne University crew. So the Sydney crew have got the clear water advantage here in the front.
They have all but sewn up this Bella Guerin trophy, which they also won last year. So many of these athletes will know what it feels like to hold that trophy, and will be doing so again later on. Here we see Melbourne University finishing this race off valiantly. Everyone will be incredibly tired at this point of the race. Not long left. The adrenaline of the finish will be coursing, but yes, a tall order for them as well today.
They'll be hearing the cheers from the crowd now as they approach the finish line to give them a bit of an extra boost.
Yeah, we can see the Finnish boys have just come into shot. One on the north side near the litter trap and one in the middle, or the south side. Sydney University just have a couple of strokes left to run.
So it looks like Sydney here going for the win. They'll be increasing their number of races 1 to 3 out of the last 11. You can just see how much effort these girls are putting in. They're really strong around the finish. And you can see the excitement there. They're splashing the water. They'll be feeling absolutely cooked, but they'll be feeling ecstatic there.
Melbourne University crosses the line as well. Heads sort of slumped down in disappointment. But so Sydney University has repeated their feats from last year, 2 wins in the men's and women's boat race.
Yes, the burn in the legs there from Melbourne will be feeling much more painful than for Sydney, because they've just lost the Australian boat race this year. But they'll be giving cheers to the winning crew. Good sportsmanship all round.